Have you ever wondered what it would be like to discover that someone is following you, but for a reason that would completely change your perspective on the impact of your life? What you are about to discover happened during 5 tense days in San Francisco, California, and revealed a truth about inspiration and human connection that no one could have imagined. At that exact moment, Steph Curry was leaving his favorite restaurant in downtown San Francisco when he noticed again the familiar silhouette of a middle-aged man watching him from afar. It was the fifth consecutive day that Face had appeared in his line of sight, always maintaining a respectful distance, never approaching, but always present, like a persistent shadow. To understand why a man would dedicate an entire week of his life to discreetly following Steph Curry, we need to go back to a night that changed everything for both of them, although only one of them knew it. It was possible to feel the growing tension that had settled into Steph's daily routine like a cloud of worry that accompanied him everywhere. The man, appearing to be in his 50s, graying hair, always wearing a dark jacket, had first appeared on Monday, discreetly seated in a cafe near the Chase Center. On Tuesday, he was in the parking lot of the private gym where Steph trained. On Wednesday, he appeared at the mall where Steph took the children to buy school supplies. "Steph, that guy is there again." Christopher Lee, Steph's head of security, whispered discreetly as they walked down the street. "Fifth time in 5 days. Same distance, same behavior. Never tries to approach, never takes photos, just watches." Sometimes our greatest impacts happen without us knowing, Steph thought, observing the mysterious man through the reflection of a store window, trying to decipher the intentions behind those eyes that seemed to carry an invisible weight. Naturally, this leads us to realize something disturbing about fame and public exposure. There are people who live under constant spotlights, where every movement is potentially observed, where the line between healthy admiration and worrying obsession can be as thin as a hair. "He doesn't look like a typical fan," Steph murmured to Christopher, adjusting the cap he wore to try to go unnoticed. "He doesn't have that energy of someone who wants an autograph or selfie. It's something different, more intense." The man's presence had become a disturbing constant. It wasn't threatening in the traditional sense. He maintained respectful distance, never attempted interaction, never showed aggressive behavior. But his silent persistence created an atmosphere of mystery that left everyone around Steph in a state of alert. "Want me to approach him?" Christopher asked, his hand instinctively moving toward the communication radio. "I can find out what he wants." "Not yet," Steph replied, observing how the man seemed to be fighting internally with some decision. "Something tells me there's more to this story than it appears." "He doesn't seem dangerous, Chris. He seems lost." How intriguing when our intuition detects something beyond the surface. Steph Curry had developed a sixth sense for reading people during years of public interaction, and something about that man awakened more curiosity than fear. On the morning of the fifth day, Steph decided to slightly alter his routine to test a theory. Instead of going directly to practice, he made an unexpected stop at a local bookstore. As predicted, the man appeared 15 minutes later, pretending interest in books from the biography section, but clearly keeping Steph in his peripheral vision. "That's confirmation," Christopher said through the earpiece. "He's definitely following you. It's not coincidence." Steph observed the man through the shelves, noticing details he had missed before. His clothes were simple but clean. His hands trembled slightly when he leafed through books. And there was something in his eyes, a mixture of determination and vulnerability that Steph recognized but couldn't completely identify. "Chris, Look how he holds that book, Steph whispered. The trembling hands, the tense posture. He's nervous. Very nervous. This isn't behavior from someone with bad intentions. It's impossible not to feel when someone is fighting an intense internal battle. The man clearly wanted something, but seemed to be waging a war with himself about how or whether he should act on this desire. During lunch that day, Steph couldn't concentrate on the conversation with Isha about weekend plans. His mind kept returning to the mysterious man, trying to decipher the puzzle of motivation and intention. "You're distracted today," Isha observed, gently touching Steph's hand. "Is it about that man Chris mentioned?" "It's strange, Isha," Steph admitted. 5 days in a row, and he never tried anything. No approach, no attempt at contact. It's as if he wanted something but didn't know how to ask. When Steph left the restaurant that afternoon, the man was there again, like a character who had entered the story of his life without invitation, but with unknown purpose. This time, something had changed in the man's expression. There was a new urgency, a resolution that wasn't present in the previous days. "He seems different today," Christopher murmured, "more determined." How many times in life do we reach a point where courage finally overcomes fear, where the need to act becomes greater than the need to hide? The mysterious man was clearly reaching that moment, and Steph could feel the growing tension in the air like electricity before a storm. It was then that Steph made a decision that would change everything. Instead of ignoring the man or letting Christopher handle the situation, he stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, turned directly toward the man, and began walking in his direction. The man, who Steph could now clearly see was named Daniel Rodriguez by the badge he wore, was visibly surprised and nervous. For a moment, it seemed he would flee, his eyes widening like those of a frightened animal. But then something happened. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and remained still, waiting. "Excuse me," Steph said, stopping a few meters away, maintaining a respectful but firm tone. "We don't want any problems, but I've noticed you around for the past few days. Is there something I can do for you?" Sometimes our greatest impacts happen without us knowing, and Steph Curry was about to discover that his simple words would trigger a revelation that would change his understanding of the true power of his influence on the world. But what happened next would reveal a truth about human connection and survival that neither of them was prepared to hear. Daniel Rodriguez stood still for a long moment, his hands visibly trembling as he processed that Steph Curry himself, was there, in front of him, speaking directly to him. Tears began to form in his eyes like unexpected rain, and for a moment it seemed he would simply collapse right there on the sidewalk. I'm not what you think," Daniel finally said, his voice coming out hoarse and choked. "I'm not a stalker or an obsessive fan. I needed to see you. I needed to make sure you were real." Christopher Lee remained in an alert position, but something in Daniel's raw vulnerability made him slightly relax his posture. Steph, in turn, felt his protective instinct give way to something more complex, a mixture of curiosity and compassion that made him take a step closer. "It's okay," Steph said gently. "We can talk. What's your name?" "Daniel Rodriguez," he replied, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm a veteran of the Afghanistan War. I served 3 tours before everything fell apart. You can perceive that there are moments in life where a person needs to gather monumental courage to reveal truths that have been kept in silence for years." Daniel Rodriguez was about to open a wound he had tried to keep closed since returning from war. 3 years ago, I was in the worst phase of my life," Daniel continued, his voice gaining strength as he found the words. Severe PTSD, depression that felt like a black hole I would never be able to escape from. Lost my job, my wife left me, my own children were afraid to be alone with me. Steph felt a tightness in his chest, recognizing the deep pain in Daniel's voice. Christopher Lee, a security veteran who had seen many situations, also recognized the signs of genuine trauma. On the night of March 15th, 2022, Daniel said, the date engraved in his memory like a permanent scar. I had made the decision. I had planned everything. It was supposed to be my last night on Earth. Naturally, this leads us to a devastating understanding of how much silent suffering exists around us. War, veterans carry invisible burdens that society rarely recognizes or completely understands. I was at the VA psychiatric hospital in Palo Alto, Daniel continued, each word loaded with emotional weight. Mandatory hospitalization after my brother found me. After the attempt. And that night, there was a Warriors game playing on the television in the common room. The silence that followed was loaded with anticipation. Steph could feel he was about to hear something that would change his perspective forever. Something that would connect his public life to a private reality he had never imagined. You were coming back from an ankle injury, Daniel said, a weak smile appearing on his face for the first time. First game back. And during the pre-game interview, you said something that saved me. How powerful when we discover that words spoken casually to millions of people can become the survival anchor for one specific person. Steph tried to remember that interview, that night that for him had been just another return to the courts. You said, Daniel continued, closing his eyes to remember precisely, every day is a new opportunity to be better than yesterday. No matter how difficult the previous day was, you can always choose to start over. And then you smiled that way. You always smile and said, sometimes life knocks you down, but you can always choose to get up. Tears now flowed freely down Daniel's face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of relief, of 3 years of repressed emotion, finally finding an outlet. That night, instead of giving up, I watched you play, Daniel said. I watched you score 42 points, watched you celebrate every basket as if it were the first of your life. And I realized that if you could come back from an injury and play that way, maybe I could come back from my own war. It's impossible not to feel the transformative impact of this revelation. Steph Curry, who had thought he was just doing his job, had inadvertently saved a life through simple words and an inspiring performance. In the 3 years since that night, Daniel continued, his voice now stronger, I rebuilt my life. I went back to school, became a counselor for other veterans with PTSD. I regained my children's trust, and it all started watching you play that terrible night that became the night that saved me. Christopher Lee, who had witnessed many strange situations during years of security work, admitted later that he had never seen anything that touched him so deeply. You could see it wasn't a made-up story, he said. It was real pain, real gratitude, real transformation. So why follow me? Steph asked gently. Why 5 days watching from afar? Daniel took a deep breath, looking directly into Steph's eyes for the first time. Because I brought something for you. Something you need to see. Something that will show you that you didn't just save one life that night, but many lives. And I didn't know how to approach you, how to explain without sounding like a crazy person. How many times do we hesitate to express gratitude because we don't know how to do it without seeming inappropriate or intrusive? Daniel Rodriguez had spent 5 days gathering courage to do something that seemed simple but felt monumentally important. "What did you bring?" Steph asked, his curiosity now completely awakened. Daniel smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his face. "I brought 12 men who want to thank you personally. 12 veterans who, like me, found hope watching you play during their darkest moments. They're staying at a hotel here in San Francisco, waiting to know if you would give me a chance to explain how you changed our lives without even knowing. Sometimes our greatest impacts happen without us knowing." And Steph Curry was about to discover that his influence had created waves of transformation that extended far beyond basketball courts, saving lives in ways he never could have imagined. No one could imagine that moment would be the turning point that would reveal the true meaning of inspiration and life purpose. 12 veterans? Steph repeated, trying to process the magnitude of what Daniel was revealing. All of them, all were impacted the same way? Daniel nodded, drying his eyes while a proud smile spread across his face. Not exactly the same way, but yes. Each one has their own story of how you appeared in their lives during crucial moments. And I created something based on that. Christopher Lee, who had completely relaxed his defensive posture, looked at Daniel with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "What did you create?" "A program," Daniel replied, his voice gaining enthusiasm for the first time. "It's called Curry's Comeback Kids. It's a therapy and rehabilitation program for veterans with PTSD at the Palo Alto VA hospital. You can perceive that there are moments in life where we discover that our existence touched other people in ways that transcend our wildest understanding. Steph Curry was about to experience exactly that." "Daniel," Steph said, his voice loaded with growing emotion, "can you explain this better to me? How does this program work?" "Come with me," Daniel said, pointing to a van parked nearby. "The hospital is just 20 minutes from here. The veterans are there now, participating in a special session. They don't know I would try to find you, but they've been dreaming for months about the possibility of meeting you." The journey to the VA hospital was loaded with revelations that left Steph increasingly impressed. Daniel explained how he had studied not just Steph's games, but his interviews, his interactions with fans, his life philosophy, and how he transformed all of this into a structured therapeutic program. "You see, Steph," Daniel said while driving, "it wasn't just that night that saved me. It was observing how you deal with adversities, how you treat people, how you maintain humility despite success. I studied you for 3 years, not as a fan, but as someone trying to understand what makes a person resilient. Naturally, this leads us to a deep understanding of how being observed can be a responsibility that goes far beyond entertainment." Steph was discovering that his daily behaviors were studied as a life model for people fighting internal demons. "And the 5 days following me?" Steph asked. Daniel smiled, shyly. "That was the final part of the program. I'm documenting how you interact with ordinary people. Waiters, security guards, employees. I want to teach veterans that true greatness isn't just performance, but consistent character." How revealing when we discover that someone was observing not our moments of glory, but our moments of common humanity. Steph felt a mixture of responsibility and humility he had never experienced. When they arrived at the hospital, Daniel led Steph through corridors that told silent stories of suffering and recovery. The smell of disinfectant mixed with coffee created an institutional atmosphere that Steph recognized from his own hospital visits, but this time everything seemed different, more personal. "They're in the group therapy room," Daniel said, stopping in front of a door. "Steph, before we go in, I want you to know, these men and women have seen things no human being should see. They lost parts of themselves in war, but they found hope in you." Steph took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. "Daniel, I don't know if I'm the right person for this. I just play basketball." "That's exactly why you're the right person," Daniel replied, placing his hand on Steph's shoulder. "You don't see yourself as a savior. You see yourself as a normal person doing your job. That humility is what saved them." When Daniel opened the door, 12 people, men and women of various ages, were sitting in a circle, sharing stories in a therapy session. Sarah Mitchell, the group therapist, stopped talking when she saw Daniel enter, and then her eyes widened when Steph appeared behind him. "Everyone," Daniel said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I'd like to introduce someone you already know very well, even though he doesn't know you yet." The silence that followed was absolute. 12 veterans looked at Steph Curry with expressions that mixed shock, gratitude, and an emotion so deep it was almost tangible in the air. "Hi, everyone," Steph said simply, waving his hand as he would to any group of people. It's impossible not to feel the emotional energy when someone you consider a personal hero unexpectedly appears in your real life. But what happened next exceeded all expectations. James Wilson, a 45-year-old Iraq veteran, was the first to speak. "You saved my life in 2019, he said, tears beginning to run down his face. "I was planning to give up after losing my leg. I watched you come back from the knee injury and realized that if you could adapt and continue being excellent, I could too." One by one, the stories began to flow. Ryan Johnson, who survived an explosion in Afghanistan, told how watching Steph overcome media criticism taught him to deal with judgments about his visible scars. Anthony Zhang, an Army veteran, explained how Steph's philosophy about teamwork helped her rebuild relationships with family. "You don't understand," Steph said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I never knew, never imagined that." "That's exactly it," Daniel interrupted gently. "You impacted our lives by being authentically yourself, without trying to be a savior, without trying to be perfect, just being a good man who plays basketball extraordinarily well." How many times do we underestimate the power of simply being our best version, without knowing that someone is watching and learning how to live through our example? Steph Curry was discovering that being inspiration doesn't require conscious effort, but rather consistency of character. Sometimes our greatest impacts happen without us knowing, and Steph Curry was about to understand that the greatest trophy of his career wasn't on a shelf, but in the hearts of people he had helped choose to live, when living seemed impossible. And it was then that the truth finally came to light about what it truly means to make a difference in the world. Steph Curry remained silent for a long moment, looking around the room at the faces of 12 people who represented something he had never imagined about his own life. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an emotion that transcended any victory on the courts. "You've given me something I didn't know I needed," Steph said, tears flowing freely down his face. "I spent my entire career focused on winning games, breaking records, conquering titles. But you've shown me that what really matters are the lives we touch along the way." Daniel Rodriguez watched the transformation happening before his eyes, knowing that moment would change not just Steph, but everyone present. Sarah Mitchell, the group therapist, had witnessed many powerful sessions, but never something as deeply transformative as that. Daniel, Steph said, turning to the man who had been a mysterious stranger just an hour before. I want to officially support your program. My foundation can finance the expansion to other VA hospitals throughout the country. You can perceive that there are moments in life where generosity is born not from obligation, but from deep gratitude for discovering a purpose greater than personal success. Steph was experiencing exactly that transformation. But there's more, Daniel said, pulling out a folder he had brought with him. In the past 3 years, I've documented not just your influence on our lives, but the impact that athletes can have on veterans' mental health. I've created a documentary that I want to share with you. The documentary revealed something extraordinary. Daniel had secretly interviewed hundreds of veterans in hospitals throughout the country, discovering that athletes like Steph served as emotional anchors during the darkest moments of war, trauma, recovery. Steph, you didn't just save our lives, James Wilson explained. You taught us that it's possible to come back from any fall. That's exactly what veterans need to hear. Naturally, this leads us to a deep understanding of the power of resilience demonstrated publicly. When someone overcomes adversities under the world's eyes, it becomes living evidence that recovery is possible for those fighting private battles. Can I ask you all a question? Steph said, sitting in the circle as an equal participant. How do you deal with difficult days? With moments when strength simply isn't there? What happened next was the most honest conversation of Steph's life about pressure, anxiety, and the personal struggles he rarely shared publicly. Ryan Johnson spoke about war flashbacks. Anthony Zhang discussed survivor's guilt. Steph admitted his own battles with impossible expectations and moments of doubt about his value beyond basketball. You know what's incredible? Steph said. You came here to thank me for inspiring you, but you're the ones inspiring me now. Your courage to rebuild your lives after what you went through. That's much more impressive than any three-point shot. How transformative when we realize that admiration can flow in both directions. That heroes also find heroism in those who admire them? Christopher Lee, observing from a corner of the room, admitted later that he had never seen Steph so genuinely touched by something. Daniel, Steph said, I want you to come work officially with my foundation. Not as a consultant, but as director of the Curry's Comeback program. We want to take this to every VA hospital in the country. The tears Daniel had contained for days, finally, flowed freely. Steph, are you sure? This is more than I ever dreamed. I'm sure, Steph replied. You've shown me what my true purpose is. It's not just to entertain people or win games. It's to show that it's possible to get up after every fall. That it's possible to start over no matter how dark the moment seems. It's impossible not to feel the transformative power when someone discovers that their life has meaning far beyond what they imagined. Steph Curry was experiencing the realization that his greatest legacy wouldn't be counted in statistics, but in lives saved. 6 months after that transformative afternoon, the Curry's Comeback program had expanded to 45 VA hospitals in 23 states. Daniel Rodriguez worked side by side with Steph's foundation, training therapists and expanding the program's reach to include not just veterans, but anyone fighting against depression and suicidal thoughts. Steph visited the hospitals regularly, not as a celebrity making appearances, but as a genuine participant in therapy sessions, sharing his own vulnerabilities and learning as much as he taught. The strange man who followed me for 5 days, Steph said during a national interview about the program, became one of the most important collaborators of my life. He taught me that sometimes the most important people we meet are those we initially don't understand. Daniel's documentary won an Emmy and led to the creation of similar programs in other sports. LeBron James created a program for at-risk children. Serena Williams developed an initiative for women veterans. The movement that began with a strange man following Steph Curry became a revolution at the intersection of sports and mental health. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, Steph and Daniel walked through the same places where it all began: the restaurant, the bookstore, the sidewalk where they first met. But now they walked as friends, as collaborators, as two people who had discovered that their destinies were intertwined in ways neither could have predicted. "Daniel," Steph said, "thank you for having the courage to follow me. Thank you for showing me who I really am beyond basketball." "Thank you for being exactly who you always were," Daniel replied, "and for teaching me that heroes are just ordinary people doing extraordinary things without realizing it. Sometimes our greatest impacts happen without us knowing. And sometimes, when we finally discover the depth of our influence, it transforms us as much as it transformed those we touched." Steph Curry had learned that being followed by a stranger wasn't an invasion of privacy, but a disguised gift that revealed the true purpose of his life: to show the world that we all have the power to be the hope someone needs, even when we don't know someone is watching.